Hospitals are meant to save lives. But what happens when the dead refuse to leave? In abandoned hospitals around the world, people have disappeared. Voices whisper from empty rooms, and shadowy figures watch from the halls. Tonight, we uncover the terrifying secrets of real haunted hospitals, places so chilling that even paranormal investigators refuse to go back. These are true stories from those who have dared to step inside these places and barely made it out. Story 1. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, situated in Kentucky, is one of the most infamous haunted hospitals in America. Built in the early 1900s, it was meant to treat patients suffering from tuberculosis, which is a disease that, at the time, had no cure. But the so-called treatments at Waverly were nothing short of torture. Doctors performed horrifying procedures. Patients had their ribs removed, lungs collapsed, and in some cases their bodies electrocuted in desperate experiments to find a cure. It's estimated that over 63,000 people died here. Some in their beds, others during agonizing procedures, and many of them never left. Even today, visitors report seeing shadowy figures roaming the halls, hearing echoes of screams, and feeling ice-cold hands on their skin. But the most chilling ghost of Waverly Hills? A doctor who refuses to leave. As narrated by Mark, who is a paranormal investigator, he and his team had always been fascinated by haunted places, but they had never experienced anything quite like Waverly Hills. They entered through the main hall. It was all dark and the air felt thick with dust. They turned on their flashlights as they entered and moved down the narrow, crumbling corridors past rusted hospital beds and shattered windows. It started with a whisper. At first, Mark thought it was just the wind, but as they moved deeper into the hospital, the whisper grew into a low murmur, like voices conversing in another room. Then, the sound of metal clanging echoed from down the hall. "Did you hear that?" one of his teammates whispered. Mark nodded. They turned the corner and froze. At the end of the hallway stood a man in a long white coat. His back was turned to them, his posture rigid. "Hello," Mark called out, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure twitched. Slowly, it turned its head, not the body, just the head, and then it disappeared. A sudden crash made them all jump. A hospital tray, filled with rusted surgical tools, had been thrown to the floor. Panic surged through them. Mark, wanting to capture, reached for his camera, but his battery was drained. The fully charged device was now completely dead. Then, Mark felt it, ice-cold fingers gripping his shoulder. He spun around, but no one was there. But in his ear, he heard it. "You don't belong here." The team bolted, running as fast as they could. As they reached their car, Mark turned back one last time. In the second-story window, he saw him. The doctor, still watching. Even today, Mark seems quite uncomfortable when talks about this incident. He says he will never forget the feeling of those cold, invisible hands. Story 2. Another infamous hospital is Eerie Hospital in Saudi Arabia. Located on the outskirts of Riyadh, Eerie Hospital was once a bustling medical facility. But in the early 1990s, the hospital was suddenly abandoned. Some say it was due to financial issues, others claim the patients started disappearing. Locals believe something dark resides inside. Security guards refuse to work there, claiming they've seen figures moving in the windows, heard cries in the empty halls, and even received phone calls from inside the abandoned building. Those who have entered say once you go inside, you may not come back the same. It has been narrated by Ahmed, who is local young thrill seeker, who a couple of years back decided to go inside the hospital with a friend. One night, he and his friend Faisal decided to visit Eerie Hospital. They entered through a broken window, stepping over shattered glass. The hospital looked as if it had been abandoned overnight. Medical charts still sat on desks, rusted wheelchairs lined the hallways. Then they heard it. A soft, shuffling sound. Ahmed froze. "Someone's here," he whispered. Faisal lifted his flashlight, and that's when they saw her. A woman in a hospital gown, standing up close with her head tilted, her dark hair covering most of her face. Ahmed felt a chill creep down his spine and froze for a few seconds. It is then the woman lifted her face up. It was all burned. Seeing her face, Ahmed and Faisal both screamed and ran toward the exit. While running, they heard some strange, really loud sounds coming from all the different directions in the building. The moment they stepped outside, everything went silent. For them, it was such a frightening experience they couldn't sleep for a couple of nights. Story 3. Another haunted hospital is Belitz Heilstätten Hospital in Germany, where many people have experienced chilling paranormal encounters. Belitz Heilstätten is a massive, decaying hospital complex hidden deep in Germany's forests. Built in 1898, it was also used as a tuberculosis sanatorium before being turned into a military hospital during both World Wars. Today, explorers report hearing screams, seeing shadow figures, and feeling hands push them from behind. We have been narrated a story about their experience by Lisa and Tom, who were backpacking through Germany when they heard about Belitz Heilstätten and decided to visit it. They entered just before sunset. As they walked through the empty corridors, the silence was suffocating. Then they heard it. A woman's scream down the hallway. Lisa grabbed Tom's arm. "Did you hear that?" Before he could answer, fast footsteps rushed toward them. But no one was there. Suddenly, Lisa screamed. Something had yanked her hair. They ran for the exit, but just before they got out, a door slammed shut on its own. Lisa turned and saw a shadow standing in the hallway. They tried to pull the door, but it felt much heavier and they couldn't open it even with their full force. After being stranded for a couple of minutes, door became loose and opened up. They ran outside without wasting a moment. After this incident, they realized why people have been stopping them from visiting this place, which at the time they thought were just some made-up stories. It was something they had never experienced before, and are thankful they got out of there alive.